All right, so welcome to the final episode in the NASPA Region 3 HBCU webinar series with Dr. K, myself, and I'm so excited about this discussion because it's in my wheelhouse in terms of my current position, and I have some great colleagues here to join me in this conversation. And so as you can see on the screen today, we are talking about institutional effectiveness at HBCUs. And so I want to take the moment, as always, to give honor to all of our HBCUs around the world, particularly with the foundation and legacy beginning at Cheney in 1837. Next, I want to introduce our colleagues. So Dr. Myles is unable to be with us today. However, I want to give honor to him and introduce him nonetheless. So Dr. Clifton Myles is the Executive Vice President for Administration and Innovation in the President's Office at Denmark Technical College in Denmark, South Carolina. Clifton has worked at colleges and universities in Kentucky, Georgia, and North Carolina, Virginia, Texas, and now South Carolina. Dr. Myles has worked in education for over 27 years and has been an administrator for most of that time. In his role at DTC, his direct reports are academic affairs, grants and contracts, institutional advancement and effectiveness, information technology, student services, workforce development, and continuing education, and several special projects for the college. Dr. Myles has a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, a Master of Education degree from Virginia Commonwealth University, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Curriculum and Instruction from Virginia Polytechnic and State University, also known as Virginia Tech. So we want to give honor in his absence today, Dr. Clifton Myles. Next, we have Dr. Verna Orr, who is a postdoctoral research associate at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, also known as, and I want to make sure I say this right, NILOA. I always get that wrong. But prior to joining NILOA, Dr. Orr served as confidential assistant to the 16th president of Howard University, where she is also a third-time graduate. Dr. Orr is an equity-minded education researcher with deep knowledge of education topics, including assessment, accountability, student learning outcomes, and leadership. She is an experienced higher education and K-12 professional with history of supporting senior level administration, high needs students, public schools, and colleges and universities. Verna is a founding member and co-chair of the HBCU Collaborative for Excellence in Educational Quality Assurance, also known as HBCU CEQA, whose mission is to demonstrate the effectiveness of HBCUs through the use of best practices in assessment and evaluation by leveraging the collective expertise of its members. Verna holds a PhD in higher education from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So welcome, Dr. Orr. I'm glad that you're here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And last and certainly not least, we have Dr. Joseph Silver, who is the president of Silver and Associates, a full-service education consulting firm. The firm has 20-plus year track record of assisting colleges and universities to solve complex problems, accreditation issues, and developing sound strategic planning. Dr. Joseph H. Silver Sr. served as president of Alabama State University. A dynamic and innovative educator and leader, Silver was described as having the expertise, background, and vigor to continue the university's important Vision 2020 plan and its academic and physical transformation well into the 21st century. Prior to becoming the president at Alabama State University, Silver was employed at Clark Atlanta University, where he served as provost and vice president of academic affairs. After serving as Assistant Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs for the University System of Georgia, Silver was appointed Vice President for Academic Affairs and Professor of Political Science at Savannah State University, a dual role in which he served until his retirement from the University System of Georgia in 2006. After his successes at Savannah State University and the University System of Georgia, Silver was named Vice President of the Commission on Colleges at the Southern University of Colleges and Schools, also known to us as SACS, where he helped to shape regional and national educational policies and issues, working with institutions across 11 Southern states. He prides himself on his community service and giving back. A native of North Carolina, Silver earned his BA degree in political science, summa cum laude, from St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the MA and PhD degrees in political science from Atlanta University, now Clark Atlanta University. Welcome, welcome, Dr. Silver.
Thank you. It's great to be here and share this platform with you and Dr. Orr.
Awesome. So we're going to get right into the conversation. Just once again, for those who are tuning in, we are recording this session, and please feel free to place your questions in the chat, and we will get to that at the end of our conversation. So as we begin the conversation, let's talk about what exactly is institutional effectiveness and its importance. So who wants to start us off?
Well, I'll start off. Institutional effectiveness really is just a process by which institutions engage in ongoing evaluations and assessment of its own achievements to determine how they relate to the achievement of the mission. Mm-hmm. And this is something that every institution should be involved in. And after we hear from Dr. Orr, maybe we can talk about the macro and micro aspects of institutional effectiveness.
Awesome.
I can chime in to Dr. Dixon, and thank you again for having me be on such an esteemed panel with Dr. Silver and yourself. So thank you again. And that was a great definition regarding institutional effectiveness. Basically, institutions being reflective about benchmarks and reaching the goal towards what's stated in their mission. What makes institutional effectiveness such an important thing regarding HBCUs is the fact that a lot of, or I would venture to say that the majority of HBCUs missions are very, very specific with regard to educating Black Americans, while also being open to all others. But we have very specific missions about being not only available to Black Americans, but also being able to provide opportunities, unique opportunities for students to gain their confidence and be able to go out into the world with these things that they have acquired while on HBCU campuses. So again, institutional effectiveness is basically making the check marks and meeting benchmarks regarding what your institution's mission states.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when we speak of institutional effectiveness, we should look at it at the macro level and the micro level. The macro level is at the broad institutional itself, at the institution itself, meaning those aspects of the institution that would be cabinet level and above, and how well they work in terms of the planning and the integration of budgets as relates to accomplishing mission. The micro level looks at how well does the units that report up to the cabinet level work to carry out the mission of the institution. So there you get into your academic programs, your academic support programs, and your administrative support programs. But at all points, you're looking at how well do these units plan and execute their work in fulfillment of carrying out the mission of the institution.
Mm-hmm. And you know, one of the things that I always talk about, so I teach institutional effectiveness at the EDS, EDD level at a non-HBCU, but one of the things I always drive home, that institutional effectiveness is everybody's responsibility. It's not just the Office of Institutional Effectiveness and Research. So can you kind of, before we get to the next question, can you kind of speak to, as you talk about, Dr. Silver, the micro and macro level, as it relates to being everybody's responsibility, from the janitor on up?
Yeah, I think when we think about being the caretaker of the mission, the board has that primary responsibility. But when we talk about carrying out the mission, then that is indeed everybody's responsibility. I use a term in my interaction with higher education institution, a term called project owner. Project owner. And so if you're in academic affairs, then you're the project owner. If you're in business and finance, you're the project owner. If you're in student affairs, you're in the project owner. Advancement, you're the project owner. So the project owners should be the first line of work as it relates to institutional effectiveness. Are you effective in what you do in support of the mission of the university? The reason that many institutions get this wrong is because they would hire a very competent institutional effectiveness professional and then think that they are the ones who's supposed to do all the work. And that is an erroneous assumption. They are the coordinators, they are the organizers, but the project owners should be doing the work, but the institutional effectiveness professional should be directing and coordinating the work. The best way I can explain that is, as we're doing the institutional effectiveness and assessment at the micro level, I share with people that my degree is in political science with emphasis on international politics and foreign policy. And I think I'm a pretty decent political scientist. So I asked them, would you want me as a political scientist evaluating the effectiveness of your unit in physics or in chemistry? And the answer should be no. Maybe I can do it because of the breadth and depth of my experience now, but I'm saying as a lay political scientist, you don't want me writing the effectiveness model for chemistry and physics.
Right.
So then if you don't want me doing that, who should do it? The project owner. And that's the professors in the unit or the administrators in academic affairs who have oversight over the unit. So you're exactly right. It should not be just one person's responsibility. It should be everybody's responsibility. And maybe when we hear from my colleague, Dr. Orr, maybe we can come back in and talk about the establishment of institutional effectiveness committees at HBCUs and other institutions.
Yeah, and if I may, that was really, really good, Dr. Silver. This is where the beauty of the work that I do at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment really shines, right? So, you know, Dr. Silver, you said something I want to kind of explore a little bit further with regard to who's responsible for doing this work, right? You know, and so it's continuous assessment, right? And I believe that the term assessment, I believe that the term institutional effectiveness, it brings up unwarranted anxiety, right? Where folks are pretty much doing these things, but as far as communicating what's happening in your programs, as far as codifying the success of your alum, what your current students are doing, that is when the trepidation comes in, right? Where, so if you are truly reflective, right? And you're saying, okay, this is the mission of the institution. I am a professional in physics, right? I am the expert. So I have a part in this institutional effectiveness umbrella. And so all of that is assessment. It's being reflective of your own self. It's being reflective of what you think you are teaching in your courses and what you think students are learning. And just opposing that against what your alum are doing. Are they in their field? If not, why not? So, and I'd like to also give a definition. We talked about the definition of institutional effectiveness, but I also like to give a definition of assessment, where assessment is basically, it involves the systematic collection of review, use of information about educational programs, courses, experiences undertaken for improving student learning. So all of this that we're talking about, institutional effectiveness assessment, is about continuously improving processes and practices to improve student learning.
Yeah, and I think we should be, for our audience, we should help them understand that there's a difference between assessment and evaluation.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know what, to go further with that, there is also a difference. People use the terms, as my colleague and friend, Dr. Franz would know, who's at Georgia Tech. They use the terms assessment and accreditation interchangeably as if they're the same thing. And they are absolutely not the same thing, right? So assessment is the process for ensuring that you are continuously doing what you say that you're going to do in order to improve processes and practices, right?
Right.
So I'll stop there because I know that we have more slides to go, but yeah, so we definitely have to be very clear about institutional effectiveness, assessment, and accreditation. They are different things, but they work together to improve practices and policies.
So I'm going to move to some slides to talk about the definition of HBCUs from the Department of Ed. But I want you all to, because you picked up on something that I have a conversation with people around, what is assessment, evaluation, accreditation, research? And a lot of people use them interchangeably. So can you all kind of describe, you know, and Dr. Orr, you kind of laid the foundation for assessment, but can we hear some definitions as it relates to evaluation and accreditation in that mix?
Well, accreditation really is a process of review of all aspects of the institution to make sure that the institution is carrying out its policies and procedures that it says that it's doing to carry out the mission of the institution. Mm-hmm. And so the accreditation is nothing more than an affirmation that you do what you say you do on very critical issues. Mm-hmm. And the accreditation process examines every aspect of the institution, from governance to administration to faculty to students, library and learning resources, to academics, student affairs, and also the relationship of the university with other accrediting agencies. Evaluation is nothing more than an observation of activities that you said you're going to do. But the difference in assessment is that you're looking at it from a critical eye to determine what worked and what didn't work, and then to offer some feedback, if you will, or some analysis as to how you improve that which you are doing. I like the caption of a evaluation looking at a flower. And so they have this guy looking at a flower, and he says, the stems are too short and the leaves are turning brown. That's an evaluation. The assessment is that the stems are short and the leaves are brown. Maybe what I need to do is put some water in the pot to make it grow, or maybe I need to put some fertilizer in it. And then after I do this, I'm going to look at it again to see whether or not it had an impact on the growth and the color of the flower. Mm-hmm. And that's what assessment does. Not only does it look at the problem, but it also analyzes the results of your assessment method to determine whether or not it has had an impact on improving the unit or the activities.
Right.
Dr. Silva, that was a beautiful analogy. And you know what I was going to add, if I may, is that the act of assessment itself is being reflective. So maybe I watered it too much, or maybe I didn't water it enough, but that is being reflective with regard to like your outcome, what you want for the outcome and the process for getting there. So that was a really, really good example, Dr. Silva.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I think the key to it is also on the front end, establishing what outcome you expect.
That's right.
And then really developing the appropriate assessment method and the assessment tool. And then once you conduct the assessment, the key point is the analysis. What did you find as a result of implementing your assessment method to gauge the effectiveness of your outcome? And then once you conduct your analysis, the question, and what is very key, especially in the SACS world, SACS-COC world, is what did you learn from the assessment, and how can you use what you've learned to improve the overall initial outcome?
Mm-hmm. And to take that a step further, the first thing that you said was you establish these outcomes, right? Along with that, you have to communicate what those outcomes should be, right? So that you everybody knows what, let's say, a North Carolina State University student should do, and the skills to be successful, right? So just because you know what those outcomes are, if you don't share those broadly, how is everybody going to be a part of the process for improving, right? So of course you establish the outcomes, but everyone needs to know whether it be institutional learning outcomes, program learning outcomes, along with course learning outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And alignment is key. So what you're referring to is what I say is alignment, and that's from the institutional mission, their strategic priorities, goals. How does that align with the divisional's mission and goals, and then the individual functional units or departments goals? And so there has to be an alignment. And so we're getting ready to talk about this idea of accreditation and HBCUs. And I want to bring notice that what really burns me up inside is when people wait till 1 or 2 years for reaccreditation to start looking for data, to start creating assessment plans, when your assessment plan should be ongoing. You know, and so if we get into a culture of assessment where we're doing this ongoing, regardless of whether accreditation is coming up, when accreditation does come, we have a plethora of great data to use to inform.
A repository of information that you have consistently been working on. It's not that we're getting ready for this, you know, all the accreditors are coming, as my HBCU sequels colleagues like to say. No, we are ready every day, or you should be trying to be ready every day for that peer review visit, right? So yeah, like it's not getting information the last 2 years, trying to gather things. No, it should be a repository. But one of the things regarding the information, I think some institutions have turnover, turnover, so that some of the information is going with the person,
right?
Or they don't necessarily have a place to hold the information, to make it so that everyone will have access to it, so that if there's something that needs to be done when this new team comes along or whatever, we're still continuing the process, and we're not starting over. So that's one of the challenges with regard to getting accreditation ready. Being able to make sure that we have this information readily available, and that just because you have a turnover, and that happens, that's not a good or a bad thing, it just happens, right? But the processes need to also be able to flow just as easily as people are coming in and out.
Yeah.
Well, if you're saying that, and I agree with you, that's one of the problems, but if an institution has an issue because someone left or someone retired or someone just quit, then it serves as a example of a larger issue that the institution has. And that means that it does not have a culture of assessment. It has people who do assessment. And that's a difference. Right. Because if you have people who are doing assessment and they leave, they would do it somewhere else. But if you have a culture of assessment, then it doesn't matter who's at the helm. It's going to continue.
That's right.
Now, one of the things that kind of makes me shudder is when I go to an institution and they say that they're quote unquote getting ready for their accreditation review. That tells me that they got a problem, because you should never be getting ready for your accreditation review. What you should be doing is demonstrating that you have met the expectations in your everyday discourse.
Right.
And so when we began to look at accreditation in HBCUs, we hear a lot in the news about some HBCUs that are having challenges and some who have lost accreditation over the years. And it seems to meet the front page of major publications or social media. But one of the myths I want to dispel up front is that HBCUs are not losing their accreditation at a higher rate than majority or predominantly white institutions. In fact, there are probably more predominantly white institutions that have lost accreditation than HBCUs, but the ones that get publicized are HBCUs. Or if during the accreditation process, the HBCUs get a sanction, then there are certain publications that make that the headlines without going into the intricate details. But normally in that same meeting, where that decision was made by an accrediting agency, you had probably twice as many predominantly white institutions that were put on sanctions or probation or warning, but they don't get publicized as much. But what I have noticed is that institutional types have issues with accreditation, and it's not just HBCUs, but small colleges that do not have the resources or do not have the staff. Sometimes they find themselves in this situation. Also, institutions that, whether you're large or small, Black or predominantly white, if you don't have an ongoing method of assessment, then you're going to have problems trying to gear up and gear down when it's time for you to be reviewed for your accreditation 10-year or 5-year cycle.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Silver, what you just brought up is precisely why the organization that I co-founded, why we were founded. So it's called HBCU Collaborative for Excellence in Educational Quality Assurance. And we are about the business of demonstrating the effectiveness of HBCUs, right? Getting in front of those stories that you talked about where, a colleague and I were talking a couple of weeks ago regarding maybe back in 2015, 2016, I forget which one, the state of Louisiana, right? Louisiana State University along with Southern University were giving warnings or sanctions, right, within the same academic year. But the headline, and even though the Southern sanction was just a warning, and I'm not dumbing down the warning because that's serious, right? But it is the lowest sanction. And at that same time, Louisiana State University actually lost their accreditation for this particular program. But the headline said, Southern University at risk for losing accreditation. Like, we have to get in front of stories like that. And that is why HBCU CEQA exists. Again, we are about demonstrating the effectiveness of HBCUs by leveraging the expertise of people like you who understand evaluation, people like you, Dr. Dixon, who understands institutional effectiveness, people like me who my research background is on assessment and evaluation, right? And so this is an organization that has been in existence now for about 40 months now, 3.5 years or so. And we got together, we had 10 member institutions at HBCUs involved, including Morehouse School of Medicine, Meharry Medical College, Howard University, amongst others, North Carolina A&T State, Dr. Kellie as well. And we have grown since from 10 institutions to almost 40 HBCUs that are representing their particular institutions and getting in front of the story, telling the true HBCU story and getting in front of misleading headlines about what we know to be true on our campuses. So I'll stop there.
So one of the things that I think is important is to do a content analysis of the standards that trip up HBCUs. And what you will see is that they are the same standards that trip up predominantly white institutions. And interesting enough, we're having this discussion this morning, and basically the IE standards are the ones. And for SACS COC, if you're in the SACS region, is 7.1, 7.3, 8.2 A, B, and C. And so if you look at the most cited standards at all institutions, they still fall into that category. The other one is governance. You see a lot of HBCUs dealing with governance issues, and that's normally because you have boards that intrude into the day-to-day operations of the institutions. But also predominantly white institutions have those same issues. The other big area that we see institutions having problems with is addressing student complaints. And it's not necessarily the complaint itself, but demonstrating that you follow your own policies. And so one of the things that I want you to take away from this webinar is that while HBCUs have had issues with accreditation, they're not any different from the majority institution, and many of the standards that they have issues with are the same. The other big issue that if you look at the number of institutions in HBC RAM that have had problems and at the brink of losing their accreditation, it has to do with, in the SACS world, Section 13, which is finance. Finance. And one of the things that we do know is our HBCUs are underfinanced. They don't get the support that majority institutions get. Even if they're in the same state system, they're still not getting the same resources from the state that majority institutions in the same systems are getting. So the historical discrimination and the vestiges of segregation still impact the finances of our HBCUs, and then is manifested in their ability to demonstrate financial stability as it relates to the accreditation process.
So given that, Dr. Silver, and moving towards what resources can we provide, or what resources out there for HBCU professionals as it relates to institutional effectiveness, and knowing that even in 2020, we are still systematically oppressed, we still don't get the same funding as quote unquote counterparts or majority schools. How do we get in front of that as it connects to institutional effectiveness and what we do for our students?
So, Dr. Orr, you want to lead that off, or you want me to?
You can lead that off because
Okay.
you actually just had me to Google Dr. Cynthia Hammond Jackson, who was former president at Central State. She's the president at CHIA now. She wrote a piece specifically on what you just talked about. So I'm going to get her quote, and if you could start.
Yeah. One of the things I have to give SAC COC a big shout out because they started in 2006, maybe 2007, under the leadership of Dr. Bell Willen, called Small College Initiatives. And what they did is they realized that institutions were having problems, and many of the small colleges, which included just about all the HBCUs, with the exception of maybe 3 or 4, were having issues with institution effectiveness, accreditation. So they have an annual resource that any small college can attend to get tutelage on any aspect of this accreditation process. Also here lately, AABHE, the American Association for Blacks in Higher Education, have taken it upon itself to do webinars on this issue also, in terms of accreditation, in terms of institutional effectiveness. I've led a few of them for them, and they are doing a great job in that area too. The other thing is that there are resources within associations, discipline associations, that focus in on the assessment and the institutional effectiveness processes. Let me stop there and let my colleague chime in, and then I'll come back in after she's spoken.
I also want to give a shout out to SAC COC as well, Dr. Bell Whelan specifically, because when we were in the founding stages, or the very beginning stages of creating HBCU CEQA, we reached out to her for assistance, and actually VP Charles Taylor is a founding member of HBCU CEQA, so they have been very responsive, very supportive of our initiative. So what I also want to say is that the accreditors are not out to get us, right? We know historically we've been severely underfunded, right? We know the things that we have struggled with historically. And because we know those things, that is why we have to collectively get together as HBCU CEQA have to tell the story, right? And when I say tell the story, I'm saying just because, for instance, one SAC initiative says you have to do these things, just because we don't call them those things on our campuses, that doesn't mean that these things are not going on, right? And so you have to be able to be creative in telling your story, creative in translating the things that are happening on our campuses so that they meet these standards, not because not because it's a sanction or whatever, but because we are in the business of making sure that we are owning up to the things that we say to be true with regard to our mission, and creating these spaces and places for our students to be able to strive. And the piece that I mentioned, for all of you all who are watching today, excuse me, please, it is by Dr. Cynthia Jackson Hammond. It's a very quick read, but it's called Accreditation, Quality, and HBCUs, Match or Mismatch. That came out earlier this year, and basically she just talks about, she goes through the definition of an HBC, where you see the sanction regarding accreditation. You can look at any other institution type, and in their definition, you won't see the stipulation of accreditation being there, right? So because we know those things, we're not going to fight them. We're just going to be creative in how we address these things. So again, it's called Accreditation, Quality, and HBCUs, Match or Mismatch by Dr. Cynthia Jackson-Hammond. Very quick read and very, very informative for the listeners.
Yeah. One of the things I would like to see is that some of our media, and I'm putting it in quotation mark, that follow HBCUs, I would like to see them putting in more positive stories. And I know a lot of media outlets follow the SACS COC disclosures, but it seems as if some of them in particular, and I won't name them, make their living off of the negative aspects of anything HBCUs. Mm-hmm. And so that impacts their ability to attract resources, their ability to attract good faculty and staff. And I would just like to see us engage in more of relationships with media that would talk about the positive and very qualitative things that are going on in HBCU, as opposed to it's always a negative story. Mm-hmm. Our HBCUs are a treasure. Yeah. I'm a proud graduate of an HBCU, too. I've done work at other institutions in postdoc settings. I've done work at Stanford University in California, and I've done further study at Oxford University in England. But I would say that the education that I got at Atlanta University was equal to or surpassed what I got at those two institutions. So a lot of good things are going on, but we allow the media to only talk about the negatives. And so even with this concept of institutional effectiveness and accreditation, we see that the negative aspects are highlighted. The example that you gave earlier with Louisiana, I know firsthand about that because Southern University is one of my clients. And so getting over the negative publicity in the public domain is a bigger problem than addressing the issues at the institution.
Right.
We have to speak out about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to, I'm sorry, Kellie, is it okay you want to keep going?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say with regard to the media out there. So what we've done at HBCU Sequel is we have penetrated the field by writing more, right? More scholarly collaborations. And I invite you all to check out Assessment Update, which is a journal specifically for assessment professionals. We had last month, the September-October edition of Assessment Update featured specifically HBCU Sequel members. That it has never been done before. And again, we are using our collective expertise to get in front of the stories like the Louisiana State University issue, along with Southern University, right? We had 14 of our members featured, including, here's the title, right? Finding community and assessment space and holding space for our HBCU colleagues. Another, key success factors in strengthening and supporting institutional-wide goals. Knocking on doors and honoring traditions, assessment practices on HBCU campuses. Assessing assessment using a rubric that is done by the Florida A&M University team. And then knocking on doors again and honoring traditions. Those are ways, creative ways that we as a professional learning group have decided to use our agency to get in front of those stories, to be able to, offer a counter narrative to the things that seem, like Dr. Silver said, the damage that's done regarding, what seems to be happening regarding losing accreditation is more damaging than actual being able to address the issues that the accreditors say that you need to address. So, and if you would like more information on HBCU Sequel, I encourage you to visit our website. If you can do a quick Google search, CEQQA, again, CEEQA, and I'll also put it in the chat for those of you who are listening. So we are doing our part. Dr. Silver, we are going to reach out to you to be able to partner, hopefully, because this work is too important to get it wrong, and it's too important for us to let the mainstream media, to tell our own story. When we have the information, when we have the brain power, when we have the scholar practitioners doing this important work every day. So again,
we'd be more than happy to partner with you. I want to go back to something that Dr. Dixon said early on, and it's just a tidbit of information that I think is important, and that is not waiting to the last minute to begin the process for reaffirmation. I've had some clients that wait 6 or 7 months before their document is due, and it's virtually impossible to make it all happen within that concept. Normally, I tell my clients that they need to start at least 20, 22 months out, because, and the reason I say that is because any problem that surfaces with 22 months out, you can address it. Even if it's an assessment problem, even if it's an institutional effectiveness issue, because you have at least a cycle and a half of assessment that you can fix. But if you wait to the last minute, time will not be on your side. And so if there's one bit of information that we could leave, would be to make sure that you start early.
So, as we're coming to the last 15 minutes of our discussion, can you kind of, from your individual perspectives, leave us with some strategies and your thought processes around the future of HBCUs as it relates to institutional effectiveness, and also include some of that professional development that is needed for our professionals?
Dr. Silver, I can start.
Okay.
I would encourage people to get involved with professional organizations, going to conferences and actually presenting at conferences and seeing what other institution types are doing. Not that we are making a comparison, but it's good to know how other institutions approach similar issues, right? So similar challenges and the approach to addressing those challenges. So I would say start there. Or reach out to colleagues who are in this space. You will be very surprised. The assessment space that I'm most familiar with, it can be very lonely, silos, because again, like I said earlier, the term assessment, it makes people uneasy, right? And so you will find that assessment and institutional effectiveness professionals oftentimes do this work. It's a lonely space, but you will be very surprised to see the amount of people who are in your shoes or what have you, because we cannot get away from this, right? It is absolutely necessary with regard to improving processes, improving practices, and bottom line, improving experiences so that our students have an optimal teaching and learning experience on our campus. So I would say start there. Conferences, if you are timid about going to conferences, there are, especially at the Assessment Institute, there's a pre-conference where if it's your first time coming, what can you expect at this assessment conference? What would you like to learn at this assessment conference? And what are you most interested in? And we will be able to match you with your interest, and not necessarily just your interest, but the interest of your institution. So start there. Conferences, scholarly collaborations, again, reaching out to colleagues where if you'd like to publish, for instance, because we all know that the publishing world, peer review world is king in some aspects, right? We have scholar practitioners who are very comfortable with that. So conferences and articles and publications, I would say start there.
One of the things I would say is that I think that the future of HBCUs, I think, is bright. I think that the spotlight on social justice and Black Lives Matters have also highlighted HBCUs. I think the elevation of Senator Harris to now Vice President-elect puts the spotlight on HBCUs. But one of the things that I would ask HBCUs and any other institution is to acknowledge what their weaknesses are and to get assistance. There are a lot of professionals out there that would be more than happy to come and assist in terms of developing assistance with this area. The other thing is pay attention to your infrastructure. Mm-hmm. A lot of times the IE side of an institution is very weak, usually one person. And that's not going to work. It really isn't. Institutional effectiveness sits on a three-legged stool, and it's planning, assessment, and research, institutional planning, and institutional assessment. If you don't have three people sitting in those stools trying to put it on the hands of one person, that's a prerequisite for failure.
Right.
The other thing is that when you go to these major accreditation conferences, and I'll speak for the Southern region, SAC-COC, they have what is called a resource room. And you can go in that resource room and you can get examples of successful institutions and their documents to see how they have addressed the standards.
Mm-hmm.
The standards aren't going to change. And the reason that they are applicable to all institutions is that the standards really apply to mission. So how do you respond to the standards within the context of your mission and your purpose? The other thing that I would ask HBCUs to do is to partner with each other from a learning perspective, to make sure that you can reach out to your colleagues. I mean, they are flattered when you call them and ask them for advice and counsel. So take advantage of that. The other thing that I would say, again, as we said earlier, Dr. Dixon, and then I followed up with it, is really start early and create that culture of assessment and that culture of effectiveness. And I think things will go extremely well with that foundation.
Awesome.
So I'm anxious about some of the questions that people may have.
Yes, so let's get into that. Are there any questions from our audience? And you can raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can type the question in the chat. We definitely want to hear from you.
I have a question for you, Dr. Dixon.
Yes.
If that's okay.
Sure.
Well, first, before I get to the question, I want to thank you, not just for this invitation, but I have followed your work for at least 2 years now, and I'm very, very inspired by the work that you do. I think that you are brilliant. I think that we don't lift each other up enough, and you have consistently done that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Secondly, so my question is, what made you interested in the work that you are doing now? And what drives you to do this work?
Okay, so I guess the short story to that is I never thought in a million years I'd be doing assessment, let alone work in higher ed. When I was doing my doc, I was looking to study transgender students, and my professor said, "You don't want to be known as the bathroom lady, find something else." Prior to that conversation with her, I served on the assessment committee in housing. And at that time, the only assessment I knew was psychological because of my counseling background. And so I ended up changing my topic to student affairs assessment, and I chose HBCUs because there was no literature talking about this space from an HBCU perspective. Lo and behold, I changed my topic. Next thing I know, our vice chancellor created a position for assessment coordinator in student affairs. I was hesitant to apply because this wasn't my wheelhouse. I was just going to do a research on it and be done. But I ended up getting the position, been in here about 4 years. And what drives me is knowing that I can be a student advocate in the space of data. Not only do I educate staff, I also educate students on how to best utilize assessment, right? And in the field, in the space of HBCUs, I am not a HBCU alum, but I am an HBCU advocate. I'm an HBCU professional. And because I know the history of our institutions, the systematic oppression, the systematic underfunding, all of that has contributed and still see us shining. And though we're not getting the publicity that we need, and it's always to some extent negative, I want to be able to be put in a space where I can create platforms for my HBCU professionals and colleagues to not only present at conferences, to not only be on webinars, to not only write the publication, but also talk the walk of the work that we do for our students.
Yeah, and Dr. Orr, there's a message in the chat for you, asking you to give the...
I got it. I'm doing it right now. Thank you, sir.
they said they've been spelling it wrong from us. Okay. But great question. Yes. Thank you for that.
Well, if we don't have another question, I just want to make a comment. One of the things I tell aspiring leaders in higher education, that one of the best things they could do is to serve on the self-study committee at their institutions, the self-study for accreditation. And the reason being is because if you're on that steering committee, you're going to be able to learn just about every aspect of the campus.
Right.
And in doing so, you position yourselves for a better understanding of what makes the institution work. The other thing, as a former provost and former president, I used to look at those folk who are on the committee and see the skill set that they have that may not be the skills that they are using in their day-to-day job, but these are additional skills that they brought to the process. And as a result of that, when positions come open later on, they're in the front of my mind about their skill set that they have already exhibited while they were working on the self-study. So it gives you an opportunity to be seen and heard by upper level administration, but it also gives you the opportunity to showcase your talents that other folk may not know you have. Yeah.
And we have a question, someone who's a budding assessment professional, and they wanted to know, they want to work within the HBCU realm as it relates to assessment. What should they be looking for in terms of mentors? Where should they go?
Well, one of the things they should do is, first of all, if they're saying that they work at an association and not at an actual campus.
Right.
I think just going to different conferences and networking, especially at the accreditation conferences and assessment conferences, and just networking with those individuals. Also try to get a better understanding of who's out there doing stuff. You know, I don't know who that person is that raised the question, but you can contact me and I can put you into contact with folk on these campuses that would welcome some input and an opportunity to network with you. But I wouldn't be shy in reaching out to institutions, to people, professionals who are already in the game. As I said, flatter them by asking them to be your mentor or to give you an entree into their world. But all the help they can get, I'm sure it would be appreciated.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other last minute questions or comments from the panelists?
I'd like to share my email address for those of you who are interested in learning more about HBCU CEQA and how to get involved. I also want to say that you don't necessarily have to be on an HBCU campus to become a member of HBCU CEQA. We do not charge any fees or anything like that. It is all voluntary work, very, very progressive thinking, young and more seasoned assessment and institutional effectiveness professionals who are at your service. So my email address is V, like victory, ORR, and the number 2. So VORR2 at illinois.edu. I'll spell Illinois. It's ILLINOIS.edu. And please reach out to me for any assessment questions that you have. And I would also like to invite you all to visit the National Institute for Learning Outcomes assessment website. It is learningoutcomesassessment.org. Again, or you can just do a quick Google search of NILOA, NILOA. And we'd be more than willing and very, very happy to assist you.
Yeah, and I put my email in the chat, silveranassociates@comcast.net. If you reach out, I'll get back with you, as Dr. Dixon will tell you.
Yes.
My thing is I've always say that young people and seasoned people should have a very clear expectation as to what their purpose is and to what their goals are. And I've been very clear throughout my career that my purpose is to make a difference in higher education. And I make no excuses about my passion. My passion is HBCUs.
That's right.
And so it just happens that all the work that I've done at predominantly white institutions, the University System of Georgia, has really kept my passion going on, my purpose going on. But when I started my business, it was because of the passion that I have for HBCUs. And so the word gets around that you can do this work, and then other institutions call on you to help them also, which we do.
Yeah.
We're a very interesting firm because we don't do any advertisement. We don't do any advertisement at all. We don't do any solicitation of business at all. But we stay busy 24/7. The only public information you'll see about us is our website, which is silverassociates.net. And the only reason I have that up is because one of our major clients said, why don't you at least put up a website? But we do this because we want to make institutions better, period. And so I'll be glad to reach out to you and you reach out to me.
Awesome. Once again, on behalf of NASPA Region 3, I want to thank you for taking time to speak with us about institutional effectiveness at HBCUs from your perspective. I want to thank you for what you have done and what you're doing currently and what you will do in this field of higher education, especially as it relates to our HBCUs. So once again, thank you. I want to thank everyone who tuned in and those who are watching the recording. Thank you. And just remember, institutional effectiveness is about everyone, not just one particular office or person.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.